70,000 slaves, ill-armed, ill-fed, hunted, and yet they bring the mightiest empire on earth to its knees. A force forged not in marble barracks, but in iron chains, led not by noble generals, but by a man once bought and sold like livestock. Spartacus. His name echoes through Rome's Senate halls, whispered with trembling disbelief. How does a Thracian gladiator, trained to die for others' entertainment, transform into the architect of Rome's greatest humiliation? This is not mere rebellion, this is revelation. History immortalizes conquerors, emperors, and victorious legions. But for one blazing moment, the world watched as a slave who fought back nearly toppled civilization itself. Before the blood dries, before truth vanishes beneath centuries of carefully crafted history, we must walk the scorched path of Spartacus, the man who made Rome itself feel the lash of defiance. The year is 73 BCE. A storm brews in the bowels of Capua, not in the sky but beneath the stone walls of the gladiator school run by Lentulus Batiatus. Here, men are not trained, they are broken. Muscles torn to reshape obedience, voices silenced save for the roar of the arena. Spartacus endures this crucible daily, shackled at night, bled by noon. A Thracian by birth, once a soldier, now property. But beneath the welts and bruises, something refuses to die. The trainers see it, try to beat it out. They call it pride, they call it stupidity, but they fear it too. Late at night, as chains rattle and wounded men groan in corners, Spartacus watches the torches flicker against stone, calculating, remembering, waiting. Rome wants him to forget he was ever free. Instead, it teaches him what his freedom is worth. They don't know it yet, but the fuse is already lit. The plan unfolds with kitchen knives and stolen cleavers, makeshift weapons smuggled beneath tunics stiff with dried blood. Spartacus communicates in low, urgent whispers, his strategy brutally simple. Unleash chaos. Seize freedom. Gladiators whose ancestors slaughtered one another now stand as one, united not by language or custom, but by the raw desperation of men with nothing left to lose. Trust comes reluctantly, yet shared suffering forges stronger bonds than any oath of loyalty. In one heartbeat, a slave transforms into a warrior. In the next, the training ground erupts into rebellion. Guttural battle cries pierce the night as blood darkens the sand, spilled not for entertainment, but for liberation. Guards collapse with stunned expressions frozen on their faces, one choking on his final breath as his own chain tightens around his throat. By nightfall, 70 men vanish into the welcoming darkness, Spartacus at their center, each man Rome had sentenced to die for spectacle now breathing with newfound purpose. The revolt isn't merely born, it detonates across Capua, and Rome remains oblivious that this is no minor disturbance to be quickly crushed, but the first tremor of an earthquake that will shake the Republic to its foundations. The mountains call. Spartacus leads the escapees to Mount Vesuvius, not for sanctuary, but for strategic advantage. The volcanic crater rim transforms into their fortress, observation post, and birthplace of revolution. Bleeding, barefoot, bodies still bearing fresh wounds, they navigate treacherous slopes while Roman pursuit echoes below. The Roman militia gathers at the mountain's base, contemptuous in their certainty that starvation will accomplish what their swords need not. Their commander, Gaius Claudius Glaber, dismisses the threat with patrician disdain, convinced these desperate slaves will surrender or die without intervention. But Spartacus studies this Roman arrogance like a battlefield map, identifying its fatal blindness. Under cover of darkness, he transforms their apparent weakness into devastating advantage. His men harvest wild vines, weaving them into sturdy ropes, memorizing each handhold in the volcanic rock. Then, in the blackest hours of night, his fighters descend the sheer cliffside where no Roman expects approach. Moving like shadows, they infiltrate behind enemy lines. The sleeping camp awakens to nightmare as slaves emerge from darkness with unholy vengeance, attacking with a savagery born from years of humiliation. No military formations, no battle cries, only the terrible silence of butchery punctuated by the screams of dying legionaries. Glaber's vaunted troops shatter, trampling comrades in desperate flight. Spartacus allows survivors to flee, knowing they carry something more valuable than their lives: terror. The message reaches Rome before the bloodied survivors do. This is no rabble to be casually crushed. This is organized warfare, and a slave has drawn first blood against the mightiest empire on earth. Rome recoils in visceral horror. The Senate, that marble fortress of deliberation, jolts awake with primal fear coursing through its collective consciousness. The revolt transforms before their eyes, no longer a local disruption, but a raging inferno, leaping across provincial boundaries, consuming Roman authority in its path. They deploy Praetor Publius Varinius with calculated desperation, a man whose arrogance exceeds his tactical wisdom, granting him 2 full legions and an uncompromising mandate to exterminate. Such overwhelming force against slaves appears absurd, like hunting rabbits with war machines. Yet Spartacus evolves hourly, his battlefield instincts sharpened against opponents who have never known hunger. As Roman columns march with ceremonial confidence up Vesuvius's treacherous slopes, convinced they have trapped their quarry, Spartacus crafts brilliance from desperation. He refuses the expected confrontation, choosing instead to weaponize Roman predictability. Constructing elaborate decoy camps, sending small parties to draw attention, he patiently waits for Varinius to commit the cardinal sin of warfare, splitting his forces to encircle the mountain. The trap reverses. Spartacus unleashes his men not from defensive positions above, but in a thunderous assault from behind and below. The lower Roman contingent, scattered across unfamiliar terrain, finds itself engulfed by an enemy that materializes from impossible angles, slaves fighting with the focused intensity of men reclaiming stolen lives. Formations crumble into chaos. Commands turn to desperate screams. A veteran centurion raises his sword to rally his men only to feel his spine shatter beneath a crude mining pick wielded by hands once bound in chains. When the slaughter subsides, Varinius's golden eagle standard lies trampled in mud saturated with patrician blood, his surviving soldiers fleeing toward Rome bearing tales of demonic precision, of a general who cuts through Roman ranks, not with blind rage, but with terrible purpose, each stroke carved with the memory of countless injustices. This transcends mere insurrection. It represents tactical metamorphosis. Spartacus has completed his transformation from fugitive to hunter, and Rome itself has become the hunted. Winter strikes, and what should have been ruin becomes crucible. Snow blankets the Apennines, concealing scars and frozen corpses beneath pristine white. Supplies dwindle daily, hunger gnawing not just at bellies, but at the fragile bonds holding this army of the desperate together. Rome celebrates, certain that nature will accomplish what legions could not. But Spartacus transmutes suffering into strength with merciless pragmatism. He divides his swelling forces strategically, not to scatter in weakness, but to multiply their devastating reach. Commanders like the Gallic Crixus and Oenomaus, the Germans sweep across isolated territories, their attacks synchronized yet unpredictable. Village by village, garrison by garrison, their ranks grow while Roman outposts burn. His decisions cut as sharply as the mountain wind, seizing grain stores that leave Italian towns starving, burning vital roads, while Rome watches helplessly, raiding weapons caches with brutal efficiency. Survival demands such cruelty, and victory requires it. Meanwhile, Rome abandons pretense and deploys its most formidable weapon, Marcus Licinius Crassus, whose wealth could purchase kingdoms and whose ambition knows no moral boundary. The richest man in the Republic takes command, with cold calculation. reinstating decimation among his forces, forcing soldiers to beat every 10th man to death as their comrades watch, tears freezing on horrified faces. Terror becomes his doctrine. Where Spartacus inspires men to die for freedom never tasted, Crassus ensures his legionaries fear him more than any enemy. While Spartacus forges impossible alliances between former enemies, uniting Gauls, Germans, and Thracians through the shared language of chains broken, Crassus constructs trenches stretching 27 miles, a labyrinth of death designed to trap and exterminate. Two tactical minds now hunt each other across blood-soaked Italian countryside, one honed in gladiatorial pits, the other in marble war rooms. One fights to preserve a republic built on human bondage, the other to ensure his people become more than forgotten ghosts crushed beneath Rome's unyielding heel. As exhausted scouts deliver reports of rebel movements and wounded veterans stumble back from another devastating ambush, Crassus stares southward, his expression tightening. The words that escape him would be treason in another context, but truth demands acknowledgement. "This slave," he whispers, "fights like Hannibal himself." Spartacus hears the trenches before he sees them, a distant rhythm of shovels carving earth that reaches him like funeral drums. A visible shudder passes through his war council as scouts describe the monstrosity stretching before them. Crassus has sculpted the land itself into a weapon, a barricade of packed soil, sharpened stakes, and calculated cruelty, spanning from Tyrrhenian to Ionian seas across the narrow Lucanian isthmus. The wall stands as Rome's arrogant declaration, 30 feet deep and 15 high, each cubic foot of displaced earth representing a slave's stolen future. Trapped on the Calabrian peninsula, with winter's merciless grip still tightening around their throats, Spartacus confronts an enemy more insidious than legionaries, more devastating than hunger. Hope itself begins to rust like abandoned chains. The rebel army fractures along ancient tribal wounds as defeat's shadow lengthens. Crixus had fallen months earlier, his Gallic fury snuffed out in an impulsive assault. His severed head displayed on a pike before cheering legions, his headless corpse denied funeral rites. Now voices rise in desperate discord around Spartacus, some whispering surrender, others advocating dispersal into the wilderness. Spartacus listens to each in turn, his scarred face revealing nothing while his calloused fingers trace battle maps worn thin from countless revisions. When silence finally falls, he speaks not of surrender, but of Brundisium, of the eastern port where Cilician pirates had pledged ships and salvation across the narrow sea to lands beyond Rome's reach. The army mobilizes with renewed purpose, but treachery flowers in their path. The pirate fleet vanishes like morning mist, their captain's loyalty purchased by Crassus's legendary wealth or broken by threats of crucifixion. Standing on empty docks, watching liberation dissolve in the salt-heavy air, Spartacus transforms desperation into terrible resolve. With no path forward and no retreat possible, he drives his gladius into waterlogged wood and addresses his followers for the final time. Those unwilling to face what comes may leave without judgment, he tells them, their service already legend. Those who remain will die free men, their blood purchasing not victory, but immortality. In the raw dawn light, 40,000 former slaves form a battle crescent against Crassus's approaching legions, their faces bearing an expression Rome has never before witnessed on those they deemed property, a look not of fear, but of transcendence. Thunder fractures the sky as they begin their final march, not as supplicants begging the gods for mercy, but as equals demanding their place in eternity. The clash erupts with primal ferocity. Everything shatters simultaneously. Formations crumble, discipline dissolves, logic evaporates in the heat of slaughter. Crassus commands from an elevated position, his eyes never wavering, his voice slicing through the cacophony of combat like a surgeon's blade. Roman cohorts move with mechanical precision, folding and unfolding like intricate iron traps, each maneuver calculated to maximize killing efficiency. But the slaves surge forward not in orderly ranks, but in torrents of righteous fury, each fighter carrying the accumulated rage of generations. Spartacus moves among his warriors on foot, wearing no distinguishing armor or plumage, unremarkable in appearance, yet unmistakable in presence. He identifies weakness with predatory intuition, sensing hesitation in an enemy's breath, reading fear in minute shifts of weight, striking precisely where Roman resolve falters. A tribune emerges from his circle of fallen guards, only to feel Spartacus's blade penetrate not his heart, but his spine, a deliberate message encoded in the method of killing. Moments later, Spartacus wrenches a fallen eagle standard from the blood-saturated earth and hurls it back toward Roman lines, its imperial symbol mutilated, its meaning transformed from dominance to defiance. Ash drifts down from distant volcanic winds, coating combatants in ghostly powder that mingles with sweat and blood. Yet neither side pauses in their mutual annihilation. The battlefield becomes a nightmare landscape of churning mud, congealing blood, and trampled flesh as men slip, rise, and die beneath a sky the color of bruised flesh. Crassus watches with calculated intensity as Spartacus carves a bloody corridor through his legionaries, moving inexorably toward Rome's command position, cutting forward with the singular focus of a man pursuing not just an enemy, but the embodiment of imperial tyranny itself. Then comes the critical moment, not through superior Roman strength, but through tactical encirclement. A masterful flanking maneuver engulfs the rebel rear, collapsing their formation inward like a closing fist. The slaves, now completely surrounded with Crassus's trenches at their backs and legion walls before them, fight with the transcendent ferocity of those for whom death represents not defeat, but final liberation. Spartacus, streaming blood from multiple wounds, limping yet unbowed, refuses surrender even as inevitability closes around him, until finally, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, he vanishes beneath the tide of combat, his final moments witnessed by neither comrade nor enemy, passing into the realm of legend rather than history. Some whisper his body was never recovered, that he somehow merged with the Italian soil he fought to liberate. What remains afterward defies Roman comprehension. 40,000 former slaves lie scattered across the fields of Siler River, their bodies transfixed by Roman weapons, yet each corpse inscribes an indelible message into the fabric of history. They chose annihilation over submission. Rome proclaims victory with customary arrogance. Yet long after the last rebel body is displayed on crosses lining the Appian Way, long after Crassus bathes in his hollow triumph, one unalterable truth persists. Every surviving Roman soldier carries the haunting knowledge that they faced not mere rebellious property, but a fundamental reckoning with the moral bankruptcy of their entire civilization. Years pass. Rome marches onward, iron wheels grinding over the bones of its enemies, history meticulously rewritten by victors, with styluses dipped in the blood of conquest. Yet Spartacus refuses to fade. His name becomes a sacred whisper on the lips of slaves throughout distant provinces, a forbidden story passed from mother to child, soldier to deserter, rebel to prisoner. In the sulphurous mines of Hispania, in the sweltering kitchens of Batavium, in the blood-soaked sand of new arenas, his legend lingers like acrid smoke in desperate lungs. Caesar rises, clutching power with ambitious hands. The Republic fractures and crumbles. Emperors ascend and fall into obscurity, but always there remains the unbanishable shadow of a Thracian who once made Rome's mighty legions tremble with primitive fear. His rebellion becomes immortal precisely because Rome tries so desperately to erase it, each official denial reinforcing the truth they fear. When Toussaint Louverture leads Haiti's slaves to freedom 2 millennia later, when Nat Turner takes up arms in Virginia, when countless unnamed others break their chains across continents and centuries, Spartacus walks beside them not as a man reclaimed from history, but as defiance eternally reborn. The memory persists not in monuments or written records, but in the universal language of resistance that needs no translation. And beneath the ancient stones of the Appian Way, where wild rosemary and thyme push through sun-bleached cobblestones, travelers still pause at the haunting sound of wind through silvered olive trees, unsure whether it's mere breeze-rustling leaves, or the collective final breath of slaves who chose to die not nameless in their chains, but standing free beneath an indifferent sky. That remains the true cost of empire, and that is the undying legacy of Spartacus, written not in scrolls or stone, but in the unquenchable human longing for freedom that Rome could neither crucify nor conquer. Somewhere, etched into the marrow of civilization, there lingers a scar shaped like Spartacus. His uprising never redraws the empire's boundaries. No new republic rises from the blood he spills. Yet his defiance infects the very DNA of history itself. In the smoky echoes of every whispered rebellion, in the clenched fists of chained laborers who refuse to break, in the trembling voices that dare say no more, his spirit resists total erasure. Rome, with all its crucifixions, executions, and elegant historical revisions, could never silence the fundamental truth he carved with steel and flame. That a man stripped of everything, homeland, name, family, future, could still rise and demand recognition as human challenges the foundations of authority itself. His legacy transcends the tactical, becoming something profoundly spiritual, reminding us that uprising is as ancient as oppression itself, and equally sacred. The physical rebel army vanishes, their bodies return to dust, but in the ruins of every fallen empire that believed itself eternal, the question Spartacus planted remains unanswerable. What happens when those you bind together in suffering realize they are infinitely stronger unchained? The wind still moves through the weathered stones along the Appian Way, hollow and mournful, carrying the ghostly echo of thousands who chose death over submission. Listen closely to that ancient whisper, for through millennia of calculated silence, it still carries only one name: Spartacus. A name the Senate tried to bury beneath decades of calculated omission, official speeches that never acknowledged his existence, monuments that immortalized only emperors, never rebels. Yet he endures like a blade hidden beneath a velvet cloak, cutting through centuries with quiet, relentless insistence. In every age where tyrants rise, where voices are silenced and freedom is bartered for security, the specter of Spartacus returns, not as mere myth, but as visceral warning. His war failed by every metric the empire valued, victories tallied, territories claimed, wealth accumulated, and yet it fundamentally remade how power fears the people it claims to rule. His uprising becomes a mirror, held aloft to every generation that believes chains will hold forever, reflecting back the terrible truth that no empire survives unchanged after its foundation. Stones have been questioned, though his bones were never found, scattered perhaps across battlefield soil or thrown to scavengers. This absence is fitting, for Spartacus belongs not to marble tombs, nor to Roman historians, but to all who dare stand upright in a world that demands they kneel. His final breath feeds every quiet resistance, every whispered vow in the dark, every forbidden hope clutched tight against despair. And somewhere, far from crumbling marble palaces and blood-soaked roads, the soil remembers him, holding his memory in the silent language only earth understands. Every time freedom sprouts from despair, roots breaking through impossible stone, the earth reclaims his name. And so, as time peels centuries like ancient bark, Spartacus remains, not enshrined in marble museums or academic textbooks, but pulsing in the marrow of those who rise not to conquer, but to assert their fundamental right to exist. Every defiant chant that echoes through streets against modern despots, every desperate message of resistance scratched into prison walls by bloodied fingernails, every final stand made by the forgotten against overwhelming power, carries his spiritual signature. He stands neither as crownless king nor martyred saint, but as something far more potent, a question eternally burning in the human conscience. If a man, stripped of everything, reduced to property, can stand unbroken before history's mightiest empire, what then excuses our silence in the face of lesser tyrannies? Beneath the shifting dust of collapsed civilizations, where empires dissolve into fading memories and once-feared names into half-remembered myths, Spartacus endures with terrible clarity, not through triumphant victory, but through the sacred, unquenchable defiance that outlives all monuments. His physical story concludes where all great rebellions appear to end, in blood and enforced silence. But his true legacy ignites with each breath drawn freely by those who dare to fight impossible odds, knowing they may never personally witness the world they dream of creating, yet fight with unbending resolve nonetheless. That is what Rome, with all its legions, could never conquer or comprehend. That is why Spartacus still trembles in the bones of every empire that believes itself eternal. Look closer at the legacy Spartacus leaves behind, not in Rome, not in the Senate, but in every human heart that refuses erasure. His body may have dissolved into the battlefield soil, his name deliberately omitted from temples and coins, yet the empire's desperate attempt to obliterate his memory only ensured its permanence. Because he was not a conqueror, his story cannot be contained by conquest's traditional boundaries. Because he never ruled, his legend rules minds with greater authority than any emperor. No sculptor captured his likeness in marble, yet his face materializes in every cry for liberation across centuries. The myth of Spartacus is not a distortion, but a distillation, the purest essence of rebellion rendered timeless. Every tyrant hears his whisper in their quietest moments, a spectral reminder of power's impermanence. Every citizen crushed beneath injustice unconsciously draws courage from his defiance. Children forbidden to speak his name somehow know it without being taught, as if freedom itself has a voice. And somewhere, out beyond the reach of marble and fire, beyond scrolls and crucifixes, a voice eternally murmurs from the dust, defiant and unbroken. It does not beg, "Remember me." It commands with terrible clarity. Rise, so rise they do. Not in legions, not with banners, not with coordinated chant or flag, but in the quiet revolts that ripple through history like heat rising from blood-slicked stone. In the dim cell where a political prisoner tattoos forbidden words into skin, in the cramped alley where protesters clutch signs made from the cardboard of their last meal, in the silent fury of anyone who dares to dream, with shackles still clamped to their ankles. Spartacus lives there, not as savior, not even as inspiration, but as blueprint. He revealed what becomes of a man who accepts death but not subjugation, and in doing so, altered the balance between power and the powerless forever. His legacy flourishes precisely where empire cannot reach. In that sacred moment, someone confronts overwhelming force and declares, with no army at their back, "I am enough." Rome never grasped his true lesson, that freedom, once tasted, becomes the one force no legion can extinguish. And long after empires crumble to dust, after tyrants' names fade from memory and their monuments surrender to rain and relentless time, that primal force continues, barefoot, bloodied, blazing with terrible purpose, answering the ancient whisper, rising. So if his name stirs something in you now, here in a world so far removed from his sand-choked battlegrounds, it is not coincidence, it is consequence. Spartacus lives not as a relic, but as relentless question that burns across millennia. What will you do when chains rattle once more, when the powerful demand your submission? Will you recall how mighty Rome once trembled not before armies, but before the unbreakable will of those it discarded as nothing? The great truth Spartacus carved into history's bedrock was this: dominion built on silence always fears those who find their voice. his revolution drowned in blood, yet unlike empire, whose legacy is measured in what it takes, his endures in what it awakens. The immortality of defiance lies not in victory, but in the refusal to be erased. And deep in the marrow of every soul straining against invisible bonds, Spartacus remains, not as myth, not as martyr, but as the living flame of a question civilization still cannot bear to ask aloud. What happens, at last, when the enslaved refuse to bow?